Sara is also a graduate from Laurentian University. She did her undergraduate degree in the kinesiology program. She just graduated in 2023, but she's been a Crush member and student since 2021. She's done tons of work with us as an undergrad and continues to be a Crush member now that she is started her master's in Biomechanics and Neuroscience at McGill University. Her past work focused on virtual reality in occupational safety training, as well as human modeling software to examine limitations in the current international standards for cab design. And that is what she is going to be talking to you about today. So I'll let you take it away, Sara. Nice to see you.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Dorman, for the introduction. As Dr. Dorman mentioned, I'm Sara Perfetto. I'm a graduate student with Crush. I've been working under the supervision of Dr. Allison Godwin and Dr. Katie Goggins. Today, I'm going to be sharing some of my work with you that examines the zone of comfort in mining cabs through the use of a human simulation software called Jack. Now, a lot of machines in the mining industry are often designed to fit the 95th percentile or the tallest 95% of people. And this can be beneficial in ensuring that no one's going to hit their head when getting into a machine. Issues start to arise when we have operators who are a little bit smaller than this 95th percentile. So on the screen right now, I have an image of a 95th percentile operator and them reaching a control or that red button you see under their finger. As you can see, it looks pretty comfortable and pretty easy for them to reach this control. However, if we have someone who's a little bit smaller, such as the 50th percentile operator, it looks a little bit more challenging to reach. And then what about someone who's even smaller? What about the 5th percentile operator? Suddenly they can't reach that control at all. And this concept of how our height affects our ability to reach our controls in our workplace is really what we're going to delve into today. So the International Organization for Standardization, or the ISO, is something that I'm sure many of us are very familiar with. The ISO is responsible for developing standards relating to testing procedures, working conditions, machine design, and so much more. ISO has developed numerous standards that are recommended to be used in the mining industry. One of these includes ISO 6682. This standard outlines the areas within a cab where controls should be placed in order to ensure that the majority of operators can safely and comfortably reach these controls. ISO 6682 does this by having these zones in which operators should be able to reach, and they define these zones through the use of a coordinate system where the coordinates kind of lay along the perimeter of these zones. So one of the zones that are outlined in ISO 6682 is the zone of reach. This is the area that an operator should be able to reach with bending or leaning a little bit in the trunk. And the second zone is the zone of comfort. This is the zone that we are going to be discussing today. This is the area that operators should be able to reach without bending at all. And this is where we tend to find controls that we use more often. So things like steering wheels, brakes, and speed controls. Now, ISO 6682 is based off of 3 different operators or 3 mannequins. These are shown on the right in the yellow t-shirt, so they're the small, medium, and large operators. These operators were based off of male and female data from American, European, and Asian populations. However, previous work has found that Indigenous Canadians and Latino individuals make up a large portion of the Canadian working population, and more specifically in the mining industry. And when we look at the range of heights that are used in ISO 6682, so once again, the yellow t-shirts, we can see that it might not be the case that everyone is represented within that range of heights. When we have cabs that don't take a wide range of individuals into account, this creates a barrier to equity, diversity, and inclusion, or EDI. Equity refers to the recognition and elimination of barriers and providing individuals with differing levels of support in order to ensure that everyone has fair and equal access to opportunities and resources. Diversity relates to the mix of representation within a workforce. It relates to a wide range of aspects, which include, but certainly are not limited to, things like age, sex, ethnicity, sexual orientation, physical ability, and so much more. And finally, inclusion refers to the degree in which individuals of all social classes or social groups, have the ability to feel involved, engaged, heard, appreciated in their workplace, and thus contributing to an overall sense of belongingness. Now, when we improve EDI in the workplace, such as through the use of more inclusive standards and cab design, Previous work has found that there's numerous benefits to this. Some of these include increases in cultural competency and humility amongst employees. It has been found to improve job satisfaction and sales revenue, as well as promote trust and sense of belonging amongst employees, and improve workplace innovation. Now, when a cab is designed in a way that it doesn't take a wide range of individuals into account, it's said to have a non-inclusive design. Now, these non-inclusive designs can often force individuals to adopt really awkward and uncomfortable non-neutral working postures. I'm sure many of us have been in a situation where there's something that we need to reach, maybe just in our house or maybe at work, and we sort of lean or maybe we twist to reach that. And I think we can all agree that those positions tend not to be very comfortable. Working in those positions for long periods of time places one at an increased risk of musculoskeletal disease and developing fatigue throughout their shift. Working these postures also reduces an operator's visibility or their ability to see their surroundings well. So the gap that we really find here is that while ISO 6682 is recommended to be used in the mining industry to determine where controls should be placed within a machine, no work has yet validated the location of the coordinates outlining the zone of comfort in relation to the cabs that are used in the mining industry, the operators, and the operators' reach envelopes, or what they can reach. Thus, the study consisted of 3 different objectives. The first one was to examine the location of the coordinates defining the zone of comfort in relation to 4 different machines. The second one was to compare the location of the coordinates in relation to a variety of operators' reach envelopes. And finally, the third objective was to examine the location of the coordinates with respect to both the design of the cab and the operator's reach envelopes. So as I alluded to in the beginning, Jack is a human simulation software that can be used to create virtual work environments, as well as little virtual humans, or we call them mannequins in Jack. You can place these mannequins into a work environment, have them do a range of tasks, and then you can analyze how performing that task affects them and their body. This is the software that we used for the study, and it's also the software that I used for the example in the beginning with the 3 mannequins and the control. So Jack was used to create 4 machines that were used in the study, which consisted of 2 front-facing dump trucks and 2 side-facing load haul trucks. Jack was also used to create the coordinates outlined in ISO 6682. Now, in ISO 6682, they outline 12 coordinates on one side of the body, and they say to get the full range of coordinates that you just flip the coordinates along the y-axis. So from this point on in the study, you'll know that there are 24 coordinates, and each of them has either an R or an L at the end to indicate whether it's on the left or right side. In ISO 6682, each of the coordinates is defined as its distance from a certain point, the seat index point. So in Jack, we could go in and define the seat index point as coordinate 0, 0, 0, and then we could place each of the coordinates their defined distance from the seat index point. The study examined 5 different operators, or 5 mannequins. These include the 3 ISO operators, so the small, medium, and large operator, which also correspond to the 5th, 50th, and 95th percentile. We also included the 5th percentile Latino and Indigenous females. And this is because when we look at the range of heights that are included in ISO 6682, these 2 are the only 2 within the sample that don't fall within that range of heights. Now, for many of us, I'm sure when we get into a cab or a car, hopefully one of the first things we do is we adjust our seat so that everything's comfortable and we can reach things. We want to ensure that the mannequins in this study were placed in a way that was most representative of what would occur in real life. So to do this, we adjusted the position of the seat based on distances that are set in ISO 6682. For the 5th percentile operators, or the smallest operators in this study, the seat was set to the highest and foremost position. For the 50th percentile operators, their seat was set to the centermost position. And then the 95th percentile operators, or the largest operators used in this study, we set their seat to the lowest and rearmost position. Now, just as a refresher, objective 1 was to examine the location of the coordinates defining the zone of comfort in relation to 4 different cabs. To do this, the coordinates were first loaded into Jack. This is a side view of the coordinates, and the coordinates are sort of layered behind one another, and this is why you can only see 7 of the coordinates and not 24. Then we loaded one of the 4 cabs into Jack, and then the coordinates were color-coded manually based on their location. So if a coordinate fell fully outside of the cab, it was colored red. If it fell fully within the cab, it was colored green. And if it was partially in, partially out, it was colored orange. And this was repeated with all 4 cabs. For objective 2, we examined where the coordinates fell in relation to 5 different operators' reach envelopes. So once again, the coordinates were loaded into Jack. Now this is the front view of the coordinates, followed by an operator in the reach envelope. So the reach envelope is the green circles that you see on the screen. This is generated through the reach analysis toolbox in Jack. And this green space represents the area that an operator should be able to reach based on typical joint angles and a typical arm length for someone of that height. And once again, the coordinates were color-coded based on their location. Now, this step was repeated twice per manikin, once without allowing them to bend or flex at all, and then the second time they were allowed to bend either forward or sideways 20 degrees. For objective 3, we looked at where the coordinates fell in relation to both the cab and the operator's reach. Once again, the coordinates were loaded into Jack, followed by 1 operator, 1 cab, and their reach envelope, and everything was color-coded based on their location. Now, in each of the 4 cabs, this was done for all 5 operators, and each operator did this twice per cab. When we move into the results, I want to hear the audience's hypotheses. So for the first objective, across all 4 machines, what do you think the highest percentage of points located within a cab was where these coordinates fell fully within the cab? All right, and I think we'll wrap up this poll in just a few seconds. All right, so we hypothesized 75% was roughly what half of us thought. You guys are pretty spot on. So here I have the results for objective 1. Along the top, I have the 4 different machines, so the side-facing load haul trucks and the front-facing dump trucks. And along the left-hand side, I have the 3 different categories that the coordinates could have fallen within. When we look at the amount of coordinates that fell fully within the cabs, we see that the highest percentage occurred in one of the side-facing load haul trucks, where 75% of the coordinates fell fully within the cab. And this amount actually decreases down to roughly 42% for the other side-facing load haul truck. However, the thing that I really want to bring your attention to here is that none of the cabs had all of the coordinates located fully within the cab or even partially within the cab. And this means that without even taking the operator and the reach into account, it would be impossible for an operator to reach the entirety of the zone of comfort in one of these 4 cabs because part of the zone of comfort falls outside of the cab. There were 6 coordinates that consistently fell outside of all of the cabs. These coordinates have been highlighted on the right in red. Moving into objective 2, which operators do you think were the operators that could reach all of the controls, either partially or fully, without flexing or bending? And then just as a refresher, I have the 5 mannequins along the bottom. So we have the 5th percentile females on the left, and then the 3 ISO operators on the right in the yellow t-shirts. All right, and we can wrap up this poll. All right, so once again, I think you guys got a preview. Most of us hypothesized that only the medium and large operators could reach the entirety of the zone of comfort. So I'll bring up the results for objective 2. Along the top, I have the 5 different operators. So moving from left to right, I have the large, medium, and small ISO operators, followed by the 5th percentile Indigenous female and the 5th percentile Latino female. Once again, along the left-hand side, we have the 3 different categories. Only the large operator could fully reach 100% of the coordinates, and the medium operator could either fully or partially reach all of the coordinates. However, this was not the case for the 5th percentile operators, and I'd like to point out that this also includes the small ISO operator, who is included in the development of this standard. When we allow the operators to bend or flex 20 degrees at the trunk, it actually becomes the case that all of the operators can either fully or partially reach all of the controls, and there are no coordinates that fall fully outside of the reach envelope for any of the operators when they're allowed to bend. For objective 3, we had to classify the coordinates a little bit differently just due to the combination of both the cab design and the operator's reach. For a coordinate to be deemed fully accessible, it had to fall fully inside of both the cab and the operator's reach envelope. For a coordinate to be considered not accessible, it had to be fully outside of either the reach envelope, the cab, or both. And then any situation that fell sort of in between those two descriptions was deemed partially accessible. Here I have the results for objective 3. Along the top, once again, we have the 4 different machines, and then within each of the machines, we have the 5 different operators. Along the left-hand side, I have the 24 different coordinates, and these are the results without any flexion or any bending for the operators. When we look at this table in terms of columns, you can see that there's no column in which the entire column is green. This means that without flexing, there's no condition that exists in the study in which an operator could fully reach 100% of the coordinates of the zone of comfort. The absolute best reach occurred in the side-facing load haul truck for the large ISO operator, where they could fully reach 75% of the coordinates. The poorest reach occurred for the 5th percentile Latino female, and they could only fully reach roughly 29% of the coordinates. And when we look at this column here, it's quite striking just how little green there is in this column. Here I have the results when we allowed the operators to flex. I have it in numerical form. So once again, we have the 4 cabs along the top, the 5 operators underneath, and then the 3 categories along the side. And what I'd like to point out is that within each cab, the amount of points that are not accessible to the operators becomes universal in the cab. And this is really a reflection of the cab's design. We saw that in objective 2, when we allow the operators to flex or bend, such as in this situation, they can reach the entire zone of comfort if there's no barriers caused by the design of the cab. So what do these findings mean, and what are the implications of the results of the study? From objective 1, we found that there was no cab that housed all of the coordinates defining the zone of comfort. There were 6 coordinates that consistently fell outside of all of the cabs. This suggests that current cabs are designed in such a way that they're too small to count for the entirety of the zone of comfort. This suggests that future cabs that are developed should be enlarged in the areas of the red coordinates in order to ensure that the entirety of the zone of comfort falls within the cab. From objective 2, we found that ISO 6682 is actually only ideal for the 95th percentile operator because they're the only operator who can reach the entirety of the zone of comfort without needing to bend or flex at all. The 5th percentile operators all needed to bend or flex in order to either fully or partially reach the entirety of the zone of comfort, which suggests that they actually might not be considered in the design of cabs. And this really creates a barrier to safe and efficient work for shorter individuals in the field or individuals who are of the 5th percentile. Future cabs that are designed based off of ISO 6682 should take the findings of this study into consideration to determine where we should and shouldn't place controls. We should aim to place controls near the coordinates that tend to be accessible to most operators. These would be the green coordinates, and we should avoid putting controls near the coordinates that are not accessible to the majority of operators, or the red coordinates that you see along the bottom. Some previous research has found that in some cabs, emergency controls, such as like emergency brakes, are actually located out of the operator's reach. And this study has expanded on these findings by demonstrating the specific regions in ISO 6682 where control should not be placed because they're the areas that the majority of operators cannot reach. In the study, we also found that the reachability of individuals who are not commonly included in standards in previous research, such as the 5th percentile Indigenous female and the 5th percentile Latino female, is even poorer than those who are included. This suggests that these operators would need to adopt that awkward, non-neutral posture in order to reach the entirety of the zone of comfort or all the controls that they need to do their job. And adopting these postures places smaller individuals at a disproportionate risk of developing musculoskeletal disorders in the workplace. Future work really needs to make an effort to have more inclusive cab design that takes a wider range of individuals into account. And if we change cab design to make it in a way that's more inclusive for everyone, this can help limit barriers to diversity in the workplace, help retain diversity, promote inclusivity, and ensure that certain individuals are not disproportionately affected by the design of cabs. Future research should use the same methodology that was used in the study on machines in other industries that have been identified as having comfort or safety concerns. This includes tractors, trams, and excavators. ISO 6682 also outlines a zone of comfort for foot controls and the zone of reach, which we discussed at the beginning, for hand and foot controls. Now, the placement of these coordinates should also be validated using the same methodology that was used in the study. The findings of the study also really emphasized that ISO 6682 needs to be revised. When we consider the findings from Objective 2, where we look at the reachability or the accessibility of ISO 6682 in regards to just operator reach without considering cab design, we found that's only ideal for the largest operators and doesn't take the smallest operators into consideration. And finally, future work could examine if reconfigurable cab design or designing cabs in a way that the controls are adjustable can help improve accessibility and reachability of a wider range of individuals. Now, there are three key takeaways that I really hope everyone leaves with today. The first is that cab design needs to be more inclusive and include a wider range of individuals. The second is that future cab design needs to take the findings of the study into consideration to determine where we should and shouldn't place controls. And then finally, ISO 6682 needs to be revised in a way that includes more individuals to make working in the mining industry safer and more comfortable for a wider range of individuals. Thank you all very much for your time. And at this point, I'll take any questions that we have.
Boy, another great presentation. Thank you so much, Sarah. I have a couple of questions, if you don't mind, as we're waiting for anybody else to put a question in the Q&A. I mean, as you know, industries are understaffed. A number of them are putting in efforts to recruit more women into what have been many industries that are predominantly male dominated. What does this mean for them?
Yeah, it's a really good question. When we look at anthropometrics and bodily proportions of individuals, usually females tend to be smaller. Now, ISO 6682, the standard that we discussed today, does include the anthropometrics for females. However, it is still missing the anthropometrics for Latino and Indigenous females. So it's very important that we consider females and their heights, females of all sexes, or sorry, of all ethnicities, in order to ensure that controls are accessible for everyone.
Yeah, I mean, you hear stories where workers are challenged. I have another one, but I see Mark has a question too, so I'll read his question for you. Mark Seguin asks, how do you redesign a scoop when it could make the production slower and or make more blind spots?
Yeah, that's a good question. Cab design is a really intricate process, and this is just one of the many factors that need to be considered in cab design. A lot of times it seems like the design of the cab is one of the last thoughts. And I think that the findings of the study need to be considered earlier on in the design process, along with other factors like visibility and the efficiency of the machine.
Good point. Thank you. In your study, you set the seats at certain heights based on their size. Do you think it would matter if the workers were allowed to adjust their seats?
Do you think it would affect, sorry, do you think it would affect their reachability?
Well, I guess I was thinking you've set would they have picked the same seat setting if they had been able to adjust it, and would that have changed their reachability, I guess?
That's a really good question. I think it absolutely would affect their reachability. As I'm not an industry worker, I'm not too certain how seats tend to be adjusted for employees. I think Dr. Goggins might be able to touch on this a little bit more, but I definitely think how they adjust their seat would affect what they can reach.
Yeah, Sarah, I'll help you out with that one. So definitely we're looking at the seat adjustment training. So operators will typically not, like we suggested, not have a full training on how to adjust the suspension, the height in particular. And so in this case, Sarah did this study with the assumption that they would have to, as the smallest operators, max it out at the top, as the biggest operators bring it down to the bottom. And so just an assumption made here, but yes, the freedom of the operator to be able to move that seat would affect their reachability for sure. Good answer there, Sarah.
Okay, well, we've got one more question. Would results be different using people compared to mannequins?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Ideally, they wouldn't be. The JAC software makes it so that the development of the reach zones is as accurate as possible. Of course, with individuals, we're all different. We're all going to have differences in our joint angles and arm lengths. So ideally, there should be an average of what the reach envelope would look like for an individual. With real people, you would get a little bit more variation within those findings.
Yeah, makes sense. Katie, did you want to add something? I see you've unmuted.
Yeah, and so Sarah, do you just want to elaborate on, you're making this suggestion. It's a really great suggestion that we do more modeling and use this type of software. Can you just elaborate a little bit for everyone on how much time it takes to design the cab, like that this is not an easy process. So if you wanted to do a one-to-one and you wanted to see if your worker would fit, kind of what would have to happen to do that?
Yeah, for sure. In a real life setting.
Yeah. So as you're saying in a workplace, if we wanted to pick a cab and see what operator and somebody really wanted to do like a full fitment kind of thing, what would have to happen for you to do that in a JAC software?
In a JAC software.
Yeah.
So in the JAC software, the first step is developing the cab, which you have to have the blueprints, you have to have a model of the cab in order to put it into JAC. You have to make sure that it's as realistic as possible to the dimensions of the cabs in real life. And then you have to have a wide range of individuals, such as the ones used in this study, in order to look at the areas that are tend to be more accessible and less accessible for individuals.